Jagga.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Look, I suppose it's not a surprise that the opposition has decided to try and use the loss and damage fund agreed to at COP27 as a scare campaign. But it is a new low. And it is clearly out of step with where the Australian people are, who clearly demonstrated in May this year that they wanted a government that is serious about climate change and its challenges, something that this Labor government is and will continue to be. The Australian people have made it clear that they don't want a government like the previous Liberal National one that put its head in the sand, actively denied, and tried to pretend that climate change wasn't happening. And if May wasn't enough for them, Deputy Speaker, well, let's just look at Saturday in Victoria. Another clear message to those opposite that their dog whistling, that their climate denial is out of step with where Australians are. You know, I stood at booths across my electorate over the weekend, in Greensborough, in Eltham, in Ivanhoe. Nobody said to me, gee, I don't think, we should do anything on climate change. Nobody said to me, we should slow down on climate change. It's not a critical issue. Everyone I spoke to said to me climate change was one of the top issues in their minds and one of the top issues they expected their governments to be dealing with. And so once again with this motion, what we see is an opposition that is out of step, that is out of touch, that is actively working against our country and our community's interests. Deputy Speaker, it is just not good enough. The Loss and Damage Fund is in Australia's national interests. Its focus is simple. It will help developing countries to adapt and to respond to climate change. That is in our interests, it is in the interests of developing countries, it is in our entire planet's interests. It recognises what everyone, with the exception of those opposite it seems, knows, that climate change is truly a global challenge. We do all need to be working together to maximise the efforts that we have to put in to combat climate change. And as part of this, we do have to recognise that while climate change impacts every country, the impact is much larger in developing countries. A lot of this hits developing countries when we see changing weather patterns and natural disasters. While we are seeing natural disasters occur here in Australia more frequently, this is also happening across the world. Since the 1980s, natural disasters are up more than 80%, and almost half the population of our planet live in areas that are highly vulnerable to climate change. Many of those people live in developing nations. These are people whose lives are being turned over almost consistently by floods, by famine. This is a global problem. It is a problem that it is in Australia's interest to support efforts to fix, to mitigate. And that is what our government is doing with supporting this fund. We're not putting our head in the sand. We're not pretending that this is something that Australia can go it alone on. We are saying we are part of the world in solving this solution, and we recognise that we have a responsibility to developing countries. We recognise that we are in a neighbourhood made up of many developing countries, and we have a responsibility to support our neighbours, to act as a friend to our neighbours, to do what the previous government again failed to do. The previous government that tried to lecture our neighbours, that wasn't there to support them. We are here to support their efforts, to support people's efforts to live in their countries while they're facing the increasing effect of climate change and climate-induced disasters. After all, we know it was the Leader of the Opposition who, as a senior member of the previous government, said about the Pacific Islands, and I quote, "Time doesn't mean anything when you're about to have water lapping at your door." The sort of commentary that demonstrates the complete lack of interest or understanding of the seriousness of the challenges being faced. People's lives and livelihoods, tossed away by the Leader of the Opposition with a toss-away comment that he thought wouldn't be heard. Well, it was heard, it was noted, and what we see now we have a Labor government prepared to genuinely engage in the Pacific, is that we are able to have strong relations with our neighbours. And this is in their interests, but it is very much in our interests as Australians to have strong relations with our neighbours, with the rest of the world, to be in those international talks that we were locked out of because we were climate deniers, This government is getting on with it. The opposition is still stuck behind.
The time allotted for